Welcome to our latest update on the ongoing war in Ukraine from the War Insider. The 315th day of the war has begun. The main news on the morning of February 17th is that Russia has lost 50% of its modern tanks. The Kremlin is preparing terrorist attacks on Russian territory. There are new explosions in Crimea. In the US, they believe that the war will end through negotiations. The European Parliament has passed a resolution on providing fighters to Ukraine. But first, an overview of the map of the hostilities in Ukraine. On the border with Belarus, the Russian army continues to be present on the territory of the allied state and conduct their exercises, but the situation is fully under the control of the Ukrainian military. Svardovaya sector, the Russians have managed to take Hrenikivka. The Russians continue to make attempts to improve their tactical position. In the area around the occupied Crimea, the enemy continues to try to break through the defense in the areas of Dniprova and Kuzmin. Bakhmut sector, all attacks in the city of Bakhmut have been repelled by the Ukrainian military. The occupiers are preparing to resume attacks on the road to Konstantinivka. In Pereskiviv, the Russian army continues to force the Ukrainian defense forces out of the village and is attacking in the direction of Berkhivka. The Russians are making significant efforts to enter the rear of the Bakhmut garrison through one of the flanks. Since the attempt in the south was unsuccessful, all the forces of the Russian army are directed towards the Dubovo-Vasilivka-Berkhivka-Yahidny line. Avdiivka sector fighting continues in Krasnohorivka, near Kashtanov. The occupiers made an unsuccessful attack. Despite the critical situation in Nevelsk, the attack by the Russian army was repelled once again. In Marinka, the Russian army is attempting to push through from the north through the farm. Zaporizhzhia sector, the occupiers continue to press on the Mariupol highway, but the only thing they managed to occupy is a strip of forest. Kharkiv direction, the terrorist state of Russia has once again committed an act of terrorism, hitting the civilian infrastructure of the city with at least 5 S-300 missiles. Kherson direction, the occupiers continue to strike the city with various artillery, tanks, and multiple launch rocket systems several times a day, with civilian casualties reported. The Ukrainian military, in turn, responds with fire at enemy positions on the left bank of the Dnieper. Over the past day, the Ukrainian Defense Forces aviation has carried out 13 strikes on areas of concentration of personnel and military equipment of the occupiers, as well as one on the position of a surface-to-air missile system. Missile troops and artillery units hit 4 areas of concentration of enemy troops, an artillery unit on a firing position, 2 surface-to-air missile system positions, an ammunition depot, and 2 other important targets of the occupiers. As a result of successful actions by Ukrainian military, more than 800 Russian soldiers were destroyed. For every approximately 90 meters of advancement, Russia is losing 2,000 occupiers, reports the Times. This is due to the tactics of the Russian army, which involve direct assaults on populated areas and the destruction of every inch of land. The Slovak parliament has called the current Russian regime terrorist and Russia a state that supports terrorism. This was reported by the local publication Actuality. The parliament's resolution states that Bratislava does not recognize the results of fake referendums in the Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia regions. The parliament considers these territories to be Ukrainian. Russian offensive has already begun, Vladimir Zelensky said in an interview with BBC News. Russian attacks are already happening from several directions, said the president of Ukraine. He added that the armed forces of Ukraine continue to defend until the counteroffensive begins. And here, the publication writes, Ukraine is disappointed with the speed of Western weapons deliveries. The European Parliament has passed a resolution calling for the provision of fighters to Ukraine. The deputies urge consideration of the issue of supplying fighters, helicopters, missile complexes, and a significant increase in the quantity of ammunition for the Ukrainian army. 444 deputies supported the resolution, 26 were against, and 37 abstained. In Moldova, after the Russian army attacked critical infrastructure in Ukraine, rocket fragments were again found. According to the border police, emergency services and sappers are currently working at the scene. The Moldovan Ministry of Foreign Affairs noted that this is the fourth case when rocket fragments have been discovered on the territory of the country. Russia has lost about 50% of its modern tanks in the war against Ukraine, according to a war study institute. We are talking about the T-72B and T-72BM tanks. Before the war, Russia had at least 1,800 of them. In turn, UK Defence Minister Ben Wallace said that almost two-thirds of the tanks were destroyed or broken, which has a direct impact on the security of Europe. War will end in negotiations. Neither Russia or Ukraine will achieve their goals, said the head of the United States Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley. It will be almost impossible for Russians to achieve their political goals through military means. It is unlikely that Russia will capture Ukraine. It simply won't happen, Milley said in an interview with the Financial Times. He noted, however, that it will also be difficult for Ukraine this year to expel the Russians from every centimeter of the territory occupied by Russia. This does not mean that it cannot happen, but it is extremely difficult, and it will require, essentially, the collapse of the Russian army, he added. Polish intelligence reports that the Kremlin is preparing terrorist attacks on Russian territory. According to the Polish Commissioner for Information Security, Stanislaw Jarin, new narratives have emerged in Russian propaganda, which suggest that Russian special services are preparing provocations under a foreign flag inside Russia. Occupiers in Crimea tried to cover up morning explosions as a faulty outlet on a decommissioned ship. Local residents of the temporarily occupied Sevastopol wrote on social media this morning that 2 explosions were heard in the city at around 4 a.m. according to sources. It was loud in areas where Russian military units are located. Local authorities quickly announced that there was a household fire on a decommissioned and ready-to-be-disposed-of small anti-submarine ship in Strelitskaya Bay. Supposedly, the outlet could not handle the load of a household heater. But within a few minutes, they reported an attack by Ukrainian UAVs. This is all the news for today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. We'll be back with more updates and information tomorrow. Thanks